Hello, everyone, and welcome back to episode 2 of the RPA podcast, The Player's Voice. I'm your host and chair of the RPA Players Board, Ethan Waller, and I'm extremely excited tonight because we get to delve into the broad subject of athlete identity. How an athlete finds their identity, the roles that clubs and environments play in this, the impact of social media, and much, much more. But before we really get stuck into all of that, let me introduce my guests. So joining me this week are Ollie Hassell-Collins of London Irish in England, Mike Roberts, London Irish sports psychologist, and Richard Easter, RPA player development manager. Welcome to you all. How are we all this evening? Everyone doing okay?
Very good, thank you.
Very good, thanks. Yeah,
delightful. Ollie, we'll just move to yourself just before we, really get stuck into the subject. Pretty whirlwind few months for you. An England Six Nations debut where you made a brilliant account of yourself during the tournament, and then thrown back into club duty with London Irish as you guys hunt for the playoffs. Just how crazy have these last few months been?
Yeah, it's been tough. It's all gone quite quickly. Obviously, like you said, the debut against Scotland, a big game, sell out Twickenham was an incredible experience, something that I'll never forget and don't think I'll ever be able to put into words. And obviously, unfortunately got injured in that game, played through it for Italy, and then had a bit of an issue, went back to club, and then managed to get my 100 cap against Sale. Massive game, like you say, hunting for the top 4 spot, a game that we had to win. So we picked up some nice momentum going into the last couple of games.
Is clearly there's been quite the resurgence from London Irish over the last few months and over that period. And I think, Mike, how big a part has the psychology played in that, in this run of form that Irish are hitting? Because as I've experienced firsthand over the last few weeks, they've become a team that's been extremely difficult to beat and playing some great rugby.
You might get quite a biased answer here now that you've asked me specifically about the psychology at London Irish. But don't get me wrong. I think the headspace that the lads have got themselves into over the last probably 3 months has had a lot to do with the performances and the way in which we've responded to moments in games where we haven't been quite on it. I think it's also helped us to sort of develop the ability to start really fast as well, which I think we're getting better and better at, and just managing different and difficult moments in games. I mean, I certainly wouldn't say that's down to me. I think over a period of time, the lads have begun to really appreciate the importance of what's going on in between their ears. And, we've got a fantastic group of players there that drive the mindset side of things really, really well. And the coaches as well really buy into. I'm sure we'll come on to this shortly, especially when it comes to sort of identity and developing around a player at a rugby club. But you need the DOI, you need the head coach and those guys to really buy into developing psychology, I think, at professional rugby and in professional rugby. And Decky and Les really, really buy into the importance of that. And I think that's allowed us to really develop the psychology of the game, both obviously, within training sessions, etc., but also in sort of the group work that we do in the week as well.
It's clear that at this level now, the skill of rugby players is always there, the fitness is there, and there's not a huge amount separating teams. So that psychology, that mental aspect is especially in the last few years, I found become really, really prevalent and hugely important to those teams that are most successful. I suppose I'll move over to you for a second, Rich. Obviously, you're in and out of clubs and you have a different kind of relationship with the players. Do you find that you see the effects of this? You find that the mental side of things, you can see when players are doing well mentally from your point of view?
Yeah, because it often manifests from our perspective with how engaged they're going to be with the rest of their lives. You've got guys who have a couple of bad weeks and the mood's not great, and they're suddenly taking their eye off the ball with the things that are happening outside of rugby that are ultimately for their futures, but also have a really important impact on how they feel day to day in their environments. It's part of that identity piece we'll talk about, more prevalently in a minute. But if you've got other things going on, we know that has an impact on high performance. And when you take your eye off that a little bit and you become kind of hyper focused on something that's not going as well as you'd like it to, that's almost a bit of a spiral. You just continue to not quite get where you want to be psychologically. And then we know what happens on the pitch as well. And that makes, Mike's job a little bit harder and the players' jobs week in, week out a little bit harder. So we see it all the time.
Yeah. And environments that are so intense and require so much of a person's mental and physical commitment, you can see why when there's these few percentage drops in that mental side of things, how everything around can either begin to spiral or it can go the other way. And when everything's going right, can really lead to improved performance. It can lead to improved morale, and you see it in the most successful teams at the moment. But I think that brings us on nicely to identity and the athlete. With this episode being all about that, I think we need to start off by asking the broader question is, what do you see as identity? What does it matter, and what does it have to do with sport? I think, Ollie, we'll start with you. What does athlete identity mean for you?
It's difficult. I think almost for me, my identity off the pitch, I want to reflect it on the pitch as well. So in terms of off the pitch, I want to be, expressive, quite flary, maybe wear some outrageous clothes or, do some outrageous things. And then on the pitch is exactly what I want to do as well. I want to score some outrageous tries. I want to, do flary stuff. I want to turn heads in how I play and how I train. I think it's kind of, for me, it correlates the two off the pitch and on the pitch is I kind of said it like in earlier interviews, is like feel good, play good kind of thing. I definitely kind of live by that. And I'm feeling good going into the game. I'm confident. I know I'm gonna perform and do what I need to do.
Yeah, because I remember before you made your debut, I remember watching the inside line stuff that England put out, and I saw the piece about your painted nails. Can you go through that just for us, just so that listeners can hear that if they haven't already?
Yeah. So it started kind of it being this season, and I used to bite my nails, so I was kind of painting them like a clear, just stop biting them, and then I've actually got silver on today, but I kind of thought I might as well kind of jazz it up a little bit, and then kind of do green and white for Irish, obviously, and then when I got picked for England, it was obviously the red and white stuff. So I don't know. For me, it's kind of, again, a bit different, a bit flary, a bit kind of something else that maybe part of my identity as well is kind of come into play this year, and something that just enjoy doing and enjoy experimenting, trying different things, and it's come down to my nails.
I find that really interesting because I've obviously met quite a few players during my career, and I found that there's players like yourself, who really want their identity off the pitch to be the same as it is on the pitch. And like you say, that flair, that something different is definitely reflective for you. But then I found that other players are the opposite end of that spectrum, where who they are off the pitch is nothing like who they want to be on the pitch. So you'll find some of the nicest guys off field that won't say boo to a goose, and then on the pitch they're taking people's heads off. So it's an interesting thing. So I guess, Mike, from your point of view, what do you see that identity as? Do you see it as the two different things, or do you find that the most successful players are those who are one and the same on and off field?
Yeah, it's a good question. My sense is that generally it's a little bit more complex, and I think we will sometimes gravitate to this idea of, we get these players who want to be a different person on the field, but then we talked about Ollie there about on the other end of this spectrum, which you sort of said, Ethan, there about how he wants to bring his identity onto the field with him. I think generally players are somewhere in the middle a lot of the time, and I mean I'm all for that in many respects, and ultimately what is going to get the best out of the individual, let's look to build on that. Now, for some people in certain stages of their career, that means that they will likely focus an awful lot on their athletic identity and perhaps put less energy into other parts of their life, which I think is part and parcel of being a top athlete at times. I think that's definitely going to be the case. But I'm sure Rich will probably elaborate on this better than I will. Is that what we're trying to do is to develop various identities as much as possible, and our job is to encourage the development of those whilst they're professional athletes. I think not just from a sort of personal development perspective, that's obviously massive to be able to have these different identities to tap into as a human being, but also from a sort of career money-making perspective. I think the idea of a dual career is huge now, and having portfolio careers, even if you're a professional athlete, I think that's the way things are going. That's the way the game's going. So it's looking to develop their identity, both from a sort of personal development perspective and in terms of who they feel they are as people, but also financially as well, because, the career in the game is pretty short. Can you maximize your capacity to make as much money and do as well as you can whilst playing? And I think that's really, really important. Not this idea of, I'll be a professional rugby player, I'll do a degree, but then I'll do it later on. I'll get a job later. I think we're really trying to shift that a little bit.
And I think, do you, in your opinion, have you seen a lot of players that the identity shifts as they get further on their career? Do you see a lot of players who will have been one way at the start of their career and have stuck at that? Because I think, Ollie, you probably will have seen it too, and Rich definitely will have seen it, that the development of players as they grow older, just as in terms of as human beings, is massive. But there'll be some players who never really change that playing style from the word go, and there'll be others who become completely different in the way they play, the way they are. Do you think a big part of that is from those around the group? Do you think that's environmental, or do you think that's a personal shift?
Probably a bit of both. Again, sorry to be grey with my answers, but I don't think it's not binary. I think there's so many different factors happening at different times during people's careers. If I think about Ollie, obviously when was starting at Irish and in the first team, we had sort of different DOI, different slightly different coaching setup, and then there's a shift where there's a slightly different emphasis on how we're trying to play, but also maybe a different shift around the importance of developing the self off the field. So I think there's definitely environmental factors involved. And ultimately, if you've got really good role models at the club, we've got some fantastic guys there who are leaders in the club on the field, but also leaders off it, doing the stuff away from the game as well. And I think that encourages younger guys coming through the academy setup to follow in their footsteps. I think they get energized by that. I'm sure he wouldn't mind me saying, I know he's left now, but Sean O'Brien would have been a decent example of that over the last few years, where was doing an awful lot away from the game. Didn't necessarily sort of talk heaps about it, but there was always stuff going on, and we've got some brilliant examples at the club now where people are doing that. So yeah, I think there's big environmental factors, but also individual. Actually, an interesting point, we talk about confidence for the sake of argument. I think potentially the more confidence you develop and the more understanding you have of yourself as a rugby player, I think you're probably more likely to look to develop yourself away from the game as well. I think sometimes when maybe lacking a bit of confidence or a bit uncertain of yourself, you might focus more on it. So yeah, I think there's lots of different factors involved, and people will develop at different stages depending, again, what is the combination of those factors at any given time.
It's interesting that you say that, because when I started my career, it's very different now, but it was almost frowned upon to be going to university or developing yourself out of it. The academy was seen as, you've got to commit to rugby, you've got to become the best player you can be so you can hit these premiership, you can hit the internationals, you can join, basically upskill yourself to the level that the premiership is. Whereas now that definitely seems to have taken a shift. And I read something really poignant from the coaches at Irish that said, you're not just building rugby players, you're building a great group of men. And that resonated with me quite a lot, because it's something that you love to see. And obviously, Rich, from your point of view as a development manager, that must be something that's brilliant to read. And obviously that's playing out in the environment. Just for yourself, Rich, how important is it when clubs really buy into it, not just the role models like we've spoken about, the Sean O'Briens, etc., but when the coaches, when the backroom staff really want to help you buy in and become, a much more rounded human? How much better is that, and how important is that for self-development?
It's vital, because they're the people that players are interacting with constantly, and often, like we said, the role model piece, they're the ones that they're listening to, whether they realize it or not. They're often getting the messaging through from those kind of role models of, should I do stuff? Should I not? Should I invest this time in these different areas? Should it just be rugby focused completely as young players, or can I step back and explore other areas? So having a group of, senior support staff, and as senior as they get with deck, that are wanting players actively, pushing players to go and do more with their time. They've got the time, they've got the resources, they've got the backing, they've got us. To have that is vital. And really, it's that important that everybody's on the same page with that. So we're seeing that more and more across clubs now, that teams that are a bit more proactive and a bit more forward thinking are realizing that actually there's all these great resources from the RPA, from their own backroom staff, and from the players' desire to go out there and do something a little bit different and do more. And then like you said earlier, we get that rounded human being, and that rounded human being is always going to be a better rugby player than the one who is so hyper-focused that they go home, they turn the light off and they stare into the dark thinking about tomorrow's training. We want people to go and have lives outside of rugby. It's really, really vital and important.
Have you found that in this, the crop of academy players coming through now, that the emphasis is to become better at rugby, and that's the ultimate goal, but not necessarily all the academy players will make that step up. Have you found that clubs are a lot more receptive to those players going out and finding other interests is the wrong word, but going out and sampling the real world, doing education courses, doing construction courses, the kind of things the RPA offers? Have you found that clubs and academy players really are much more accepting of that and much more keen in there?
Yeah, for sure. I think, the RFU putting in several years ago those caveats and bullet point KPIs that academies need to be having players doing something else alongside rugby is a really great help to that as well. But certainly they're coming through, and I think the academy managers are more on board with that message. So again, it gets circled round, and people get the same messaging again and again. But players are more open to that because they understand the environment, they understand the risks, they understand the likelihoods of going to different levels. We've also got environments like senior universities who are working through the BSR programs, who are doing good things and offering different opportunities. We have the championship clubs that, again, they're not likely to be full-time for a lot of those guys, so they need to have something else going on. So when you look across the entire spectrum of what professional rugby is at the moment in this country, it's not just that it's important, it's a vital piece of their rugby development that they're doing something else, and they're getting more receptive and understanding that, which then helps us to help them. You've got to have that open mind for us to do our work with players and then help them to discover a little bit more about themselves, which, hopefully, fingers crossed, 15 years down the line, 35 years old and retiring by choice, they've then got other things they can go to and enjoy. And they haven't had this kind of moment of transition, which we all sort of fear for players, that they go, what the hell am I going to do next? And identity for me is the entryway into all those things. If you can get somebody thinking about who they are, their values, their interests, their passions, what excites them, and not just describe themselves as, I am John, I play rugby, then we get entryways into so many different subjects within their lives, and then hopefully getting them helping themselves a little bit.
That brings me on to sort of the next point that I was going to make, which is massive. And it's one thing that's hugely important in rugby and all sport to a degree, I suppose, is to how vital it is to find out who you are without rugby or without sport. Because as you've alluded to, we know how fragile a career can be, and the day will come to hang up your boots. For some people, it may come very early in the career through a shock injury. Some people, they may go on, do a Stephen Myler till they're 40, 50 years old, whatever he is now. But how do we continue to function when that day comes and we are no longer Ethan and Ollie, the rugby players, but we're Ethan and Ollie, the everyday human? Mike, from your point of view, what do we know from psych research that having an identity outside of rugby, what does it do for not just performance, I guess, but for fulfillment and happiness?
Yeah, really good question. Again, I mean, how long have we got, really? I think, first of all, interestingly, having a really strong athletic identity is massive. It's really, really important. And again, I think young guys at a certain stage in their career, it's all they're going to focus on to a greater or lesser extent. And it's not controversial, obviously, but part of me, my impression is that actually at times that's really important. It's really important for guys to almost solely focus on it a little bit. Again, maybe I'm being a bit biased. I'm sure other people have different sort of perspectives on that, but I think it's really important for that, to build a really salient sort of idea of self within that sporting context, which is really important. Develop self-confidence, obviously. Develop a good relationship with sort of health and fitness. I think there's things that sort of will grow beyond the game, even if they're just focused on their athletic identity for a period of time. But I mean, as you said, I think there's the warning, there's things to be sort of careful with there, because obviously having a really strong athletic identity, and like you said, if someone gets injured, say it's a long-term injury or someone has to retire for the sake of argument, that leaves someone in potentially really sort of risky situation where their sense of self and identity is heavily compromised, which isn't, again, a place where we want players to be. And obviously having a really strong athletic identity, I think, can make that process, that transition out of the game more challenging. I'd be hesitant to say that it's going to always be a bad experience. For some people, that's a really challenging experience, but actually a really good one, even if they maybe don't have heaps going on. But ideally, again, Rich and I, our positions are there to give them the best chance and help develop that identity as much as possible. But definitely from a performance perspective, people's capacity to be able to sort of switch on, switch off, I do think improves. Their ability to come to almost swipe in. They come to Irish, a hyper focus when they're at Hazelwood, but then sort of swipe out because they've got an interior design degree to be getting on with, or whatever it is that they're doing away from the game. And we it doesn't have to be a degree either. We've got a guy who's just recently finished writing a book, and it's brilliant. And that's not necessarily. I might make him money in time. I've got huge confidence in his ability as a human being, but it doesn't have to be a degree. It doesn't have to be anything it doesn't have to be something which sort of, I guess, you classically expect, so long as they are developing a sense of self away from the game. I just think that's really, really important. I appreciate I've sort of waffled a bit around your question there, Ethan, but hopefully there's some good stuff in there.
It's okay. I don't think any of this stuff is, as you say, I don't think any of it's binary, but I find it interesting. And I agree with you to an extent. If you are to be successful in the game, there has to be a period where you are fully committed to it and you're fully going for it. But it's like you say, it's when you check out of the environment that you're in and you're going home that you've got to have an outlet of some sort that is who you are. And I've seen I've lived with some interesting characters over the years. I've seen some people will cook, some people will do art. I had a friend who loved a lot of drawing, and then others it's music. Some people it's a degree. It's varied. It's like you say. I think a lot of it is figuring out what it is you don't like doing as much as what you do like doing. I think when a lot of players miss out on that university period where you'd be trying all these different things through various clubs or what have you might not necessarily get that in rugby as you like, as you say, you're so hyper focused. But
well, I mean, interestingly, I just want to add because you make a really, really good point there. I think finding out what you don't want to do is half the battle. And I think sometimes players and professional athletes can sometimes, so some won't be at all. Some will just go out and find out and fail along the way to success outside of the game, and that's absolutely fine. I think some players, because of the standards they hold themselves to in sport, and potentially a little bit perfectionist at times, might actually hesitate doing it because they're almost scared of getting it wrong and scared of doing something which they don't like, which is actually, again, part of the process. And again, Rich and I, our job a little bit is to normalize that fear a little bit and make people, it's all right. You don't have to get this right straight away. Let's try something. And if it doesn't work, well, you know what, you might just find something off the back of that. So yeah, but it's everyone goes about it so differently. I mean, that's what's fascinating. It makes sort of, mine and Rich's job, especially Rich, who's having to chase the lads up to find out exactly what's going on, particularly difficult at times. So.
Ollie, I'll come to you. And you mentioned there about during the Six Nations, obviously getting that injury. Have you had any large spells out injured where, or perhaps when you're out on loan, not necessarily around the Irish environment, where you were struggling to identify with who you were, not necessarily just as an athlete, but as a person in that period? And if so, how did you sort of find your way back to where you are now?
My first kind of major injury in the first team was I broke my fifth met, which is in your foot. So I was out for, I think, pretty much like pre-season, which is obviously, that's where you kind of meet your mates, where you spend most of the time together, because there's no games. You're doing everything together. There's no like splitting up in training, nothing like that. So I think I'm not. Potentially back then wasn't the most confident guy in my second year. I was probably a bit hesitant. Wouldn't really put myself out there. But for me, it's been over the past few years where I've understood where I stand in the team, who I am in the team, and it's kind of grown from there in terms of all the off-field stuff. And for me, it's like the confidence on the pitch. I feel comfortable going up to Paddy and be like, you need to do this for me, or going up to Bernard or Rory Jennings, being like, look, you need to give me the ball, you need to fast, or anything, wherever it could be. I think that's probably past few years, but definitely when I was in and out, I was with 20s, in and out, and then I was kind of making connections, and I wouldn't see them for a few weeks, and it's kind of hard to kind of make those strong connections, if you get me. And then I'd be on the bench, I'd be starting. I was kind of all over the place at points. But once I kind of solidified myself into the Irish team and I felt comfortable, and thankfully I've had a pretty good run of non-injuries apart from this one. That's where I've grown my identity and understand who I am. And I've got to give credit to my girlfriend as well. She's given me, and obviously Mike, a bit of confidence to express myself and try different things. And I think it's something that can happen overnight. For me, like I say, it was quite a few years that got me comfortable with who I am and what I want to do.
It sort of circles back to the point that you made, Mike, and how massive confidence is in finding your identity, whether that's confidence in the team or not necessarily just that for you, Ollie, but the confidence in the environment and in the friendships and the connections that you make with the rest of your teammates. But I think we'll move on slightly, and I think it's important that we talk about the personal development managers and the RPA and the role that the RPA plays in helping develop players off the pitch via the Gainline program. It's so important that players see more than just sport. As we've already spoken about, there's plenty of benefits to it, and there's so many attributes from the elite sport world that when the time does come to retire, whenever that may be, really do transition and are very desirable and not necessarily found a lot in the everyday working world. So, Rich, how can players practically look at this Gainline program and expand their identity?
It's about spending time to understand yourself. Mike sort of alluded to it with that kind of idea of, focusing all in at one point and then, expanding that later on. I think another way to think of it is that, your life and time is a pendulum. And at some points, you're going to have to swing that pendulum over towards rugby and sport. And you're going to, maybe it's 90-10, it's extreme as that. 9% of your time, you thought your energy is going to be over there, but there's 10% of your time we can still work on stuff here. And then, as you maybe get more comfortable or out of season, we can swing that pendulum back over the other way a little bit and invest our time over here. So it's that, understanding who you are, what's your value set? What are your interests? What are your passions? What things do you hate? We've sort of said that already. What things don't I want to do? That's vital. Tick some stuff out and get it out of the way. For an athlete to have a strong sense themselves, they've really got to spend some time investing in that thought process. I think we're really lucky, and I spoke to Ollie many, many times at the club, and understanding what he wants to do post-rugby and alongside rugby, and getting him to sort of go away and look at some of those options and think about them. I'm sure he'll speak about his stuff away from rugby and his wants and desires himself, but having, the sort of license, and for me, giving the player the license to say, no, you've got an hour free this week. I'm sure you've got an hour. Go and do this, and we'll help you to find those bits. If you don't know where they are, this is where you can find some options and speak to some experts. So that, coming back to the whole focal point of this conversation, that rugby doesn't become so all-encompassing that the person becomes quite fragile. Because if we do have a sort of scenario where somebody can't continue, that's not a place we want them to find themselves. I think an exercise that I like to do with people is these several different questions, but it all starts with something that anybody listening can go away and do themselves with a loved one or just by themselves, is that simple question of, who am I? And I cannot describe myself through rugby. I cannot talk about myself and mention rugby, but I have to talk about me, write down who I am. And then really, really challenging thing to do, really difficult conversation to have, really difficult question to answer, even when you don't spend all your time doing rugby, because it's so ingrained in who you are. And that sometimes highlights a little bit to people, okay, maybe there were things I used to do that I really want to pick up again. Maybe there are passions I've got that I really want to try. What have I always wanted to do? What have I seen online? What have I got mates who do? What could I do that I don't do? Start asking those kind of really open-ended questions, and you might find there are 2 or 3 things you just start to see come up again and again. And then, for players listening particularly, speak to us and we can help you invest in that. For anybody else listening, this is not unique to rugby. This is often something you see with people who are hyper invested in their careers as well, actually, that their identity is so fixed to what they do that it's not who they are, and they don't spend time to find out who they are. So it's really important. And some simple questions like that are never a bad place to start.
I think you summed that up incredibly well, and how important it is just to not have, I'm going to put it in a much easier, a much shorter nutshell and a much more simple nutshell, in that it's important to not have all your eggs in one basket, isn't it? And that 90-10 or whatever percentage it might be is something that I think will resonate with me, and I will 100% be taken back to my academy lads when I go back into the club tomorrow. I'll credit you though, so it's okay.
And the other thing as well is don't use that old language of plan B. I think we can move away from that very, very strongly, very quickly, and say, actually, I'm a rugby player and I do this. very much encompassing and including more and more and more. And the more you do, there's no evidence to suggest that's going to be detrimental to your rugby, detrimental to your sporting performance on the pitch. So there's no downside. For me, it's a win-win. There's so many protective factors to mental health and well-being too. There's no downside to having a go at some stuff.
And Ollie, I'm going to have to ask then, from your point of view, obviously you've been part of the RPA and the Gain Line program for some time now. How useful has it been for you, and what have you been doing outside of the rugby world?
Yeah, no, it's been massive. They obviously, come in a few times a week, and he's always there. He's always available for a chat. So they've been huge for me in finding out, like say, what I'm interested in. I think on that, my kind of passions have probably changed, or like I've added passions or that kind of stuff. So I think it's kind of over time, like I said, I kind of found myself, and then I can kind of go to Rich and be like, look, this is what I'm interested in. This is what I look at. And then he'll go away and find me some great courses I can have a think about and see what I want to kind of enroll on, and kind of spend that 10% that I'm not at the club doing. And I don't go home and think, oh God, I've got to do this. It's kind of like, yes, I get to go home and do this, and I'm excited to do it. I'm excited to complete this course. And it's kind of like I'll go back in the next day for Irish, and it doesn't feel like a job. It's kind of back to the old days where it's a hobby and you're doing it because you love it. And not saying I don't love it, obviously still love it, but it's kind of like back in the under 10s where you're just with your mates running around and just enjoying the game. They've been massive for me, definitely.
And it's hugely important, isn't it? To have something on the outside that means that the game becomes enjoyment again, not necessarily just a job, as you said there, because we all grew up loving the game and enjoying it daily. And when it does become your job, it is very easy for it to fall into that cycle and not necessarily always be feeling positive about it. So that is huge. Gents, that brings us to the end of this conversation. I really appreciate all of you giving up the time tonight, and I think we've covered some really important topics. So a huge thank you to all three of you for giving that up and helping us start the conversation about this topic that hopefully any players listening or anyone really listening that's fully invested in their work or anything of that nature can hopefully go out and help find their identity and who they are and what they like doing. So again, a massive thank you to all three of you for giving up that time. That is it for this month's edition of The Player's Voice, but we just wanted to remind you of the upcoming Etalast RPA Awards that are being held on the 17th of May. There are still spaces available for one of the biggest rugby nights of the year. Email events@therpa.co.uk to book your place. Now, for the hybrid rugby and music fans amongst you, you will be delighted to know that James Haskell will be DJing the after party, so it is not one that you want to miss. Please book your tickets now. It's guaranteed to be an amazing night. We do want to hear off you, so if you have anything that you want to suggest to talk about, or if you have any questions, tweet us using the hashtag #ThePlayersVoice. Thank you again, and see you all next time.